He picked it up and inquired for its owner. Owner. That line is from Wuthering Heights, the most famous love story in the English language. Wild moors, Cathy and Heathcliff, a love stronger than death. This winter, Hollywood sold it again as the greatest love story of all time. But the story begins with a man in a port city asking who owns a child. The year is 1771. The port is Liverpool, Britain's busiest slave trading port. Emily Bronte put the evidence on the page, and readers have been reading past it for 179 years. A port that priced children. A fortune with no paperwork. 2 houses taken by signatures. And a village register where the average life ends at 25. A property file with a body count. Put the file back together, and the story changes shape. The famous version, I am Heathcliff, the moors, the love stronger than death, is not exactly false. It is the cover sheet. Start where the story starts. A Yorkshire farmer named Earnshaw tells his family he is walking to Liverpool, 60 miles each way, on foot. He is gone 3 days, and he comes home with something wrapped inside his greatcoat. Not a gift, a child. The housekeeper who tells us the whole story remembers exactly what the family saw when the coat came open. A dirty, ragged, black-haired child, big enough to walk and to talk, speaking something none of them could understand. And she remembers the explanation Earnshaw gave, almost word for word.
He saw it, starving and houseless and as good as dumb, in the streets of Liverpool, where he picked it up and inquired for its owner. Not a soul knew to whom it belonged.
Not its parents, its owner. The word sits in the sentence like a splinter, and the family's own words for the boy do the rest of the work. Earnshaw himself, holding the child he had just carried 60 miles, says,
It's as dark almost as if it came from the devil.
The neighbors are blunter. The magistrate next door calls him
A little lascar, or an American or Spanish castaway.
a lascar, a sailor from India, a castaway from the American colonies, or the Spanish ones. Every guess the book offers points at the same thing. The sea, the trade. The boy came from the water. So hold the first question. Who owned the child? Because here's what that port was, in the exact summer the book names. Liverpool in 1771 was clearing more than 100 ships a year for the African coast. That is the port's own shipping record, and it survives. Count those records forward through these characters' lifetimes, and Liverpool's merchants come to control more than 8 of every 10 British slaving voyages. A port whose docks were built on that business. Its newspapers carried the paperwork, sale notices, and advertisements for runaways, including children, described like property, priced like property, hunted like property. A child alone on those docks raised the question the port itself had taught Earnshaw to ask. Not whose child, whose property. 12 months after Earnshaw's walk, the question reached England's highest court. June 1772. A man named James Somerset, carried to London as a slave, escaped, recaptured, chained on a ship bound for Jamaica. The court was asked, can a person be forced out of England as property? The answer was no, and the ships kept sailing from Liverpool for another 35 years. That is the England this story lives in. Not the England of the candles and the moors. The England where a farmer in a port street asks his question, who owns this child? Because in Liverpool, in 1771, that was a reasonable question to ask. The book never settles what the boy was. A fictional child has no papers. The port had plenty. Now the second question, the one the whole plot hangs on. The boy grows up. The old man dies. The heir, Hindley, degrades him, stops his schooling, puts him in the fields, beats him in front of the girl he loves. And one night, Heathcliff overhears Cathy say it would degrade her to marry him. He walks out the door into the storm. 3 years pass. Cathy marries the magistrate's son, Edgar, heir of Thrushcross Grange, the polished house in the valley below. And then a stranger walks back in, tall, dressed like a gentleman, carrying money. The same man. The book never says where the money came from. For 179 years, readers have asked, and this spring, with the film in theaters, millions asked again. The popular answer is a shrug. The book doesn't say. But the book does say when, and the when is an answer. He disappears in 1780. He returns in September 1783. Those are the last 3 years of the American War. And on the Liverpool coast, those years meant exactly 2 booming trades. Privateering, licensed sea raiding, paid in prize money, no questions asked. And the Africa trade itself, rebounding hard as the war ended. Now be precise about what that is, because precision is the contract here. It is not proof. He is fiction. There is no ship to name, no ledger with his name in it. It is a map and a calendar. A man with nothing, 3 years, and that coastline. Speculation, and it stays speculation. What the record does support is smaller and stranger. The book leaves the money dark because in 1783, dark money was ordinary money. A gentleman's fortune with no paperwork was nobody's business. Source of funds undocumented. But what he does with the money, the book documents step by step. And this is where the love story becomes a different kind of file. In 1926, a London barrister named Charles Percy Sanger, a Chancery lawyer, a man who spent his career on exactly this kind of paperwork, sat down with the novel and did something nobody had thought to do. He audited it.
The 10 or 12 legal references are, I think, sufficient to enable us to ascertain the various legal processes by which Heathcliff obtained the property.
Sufficient. A Victorian parson's daughter who almost never left her village wrote a takeover so legally precise that a barrister could reconstruct it line by line, under the property law of the 1780s, which she got right. Here is what the audit shows. Step 1. The card table. Kathy's brother Hindley, the heir of the farm, drinking himself into ruin, gambles against the man who came back rich. He loses and borrows and loses and mortgages until Heathcliff holds the debt on the whole Earnshaw estate. When Hindley dies at 27, Heathcliff doesn't inherit Wuthering Heights. He doesn't need to. He is the mortgagee in possession. The house is collateral and he is the collector. Hindley's son Hareton, the rightful heir, is kept in his own house as an unpaid farmhand. And Sanger, running the numbers a century later, found the detail that turns the screw. After 18 years of pocketing the farm's rents and profits, the debt should have been paid off. The boy should have had his estate back. Clear. Heathcliff kept it anyway. Who was going to audit him? Step 2. The elopement. Heathcliff charms Isabella, Edgar's younger sister, 18 years old, with a claim on Thrushcross Grange, into running away with him. No wedding settlement, no lawyers. And that detail is the whole point. Under the law of coverture, a married woman's legal existence was suspended into her husband's. Everything Isabella owned that could move, money, securities, possessions, became his at the altar. The only protection an heiress had was a settlement negotiated before the marriage. An elopement was not a romance. An elopement was the removal of the lawyers. She fled him within months, pregnant. The law did not follow her. It stayed with the husband. Step 3. The children. Years later, Heathcliff's son, his child by Isabella, a sickly boy of 17, is dying. And under the grandfather's will, that dying boy is next in line to Thrushcross Grange. So Heathcliff lures Edgar and Kathy's daughter, the rightful heiress of the Grange, into his house, locks the doors, and keeps her prisoner until she marries the dying boy. Days locked in a room. The housekeeper who tells us the story was locked up with her. Then the last signature. The dying boy is a minor, and the law splits what he owns into 2 piles. The land is locked. A minor cannot will away land. But the second pile, the money and everything movable, he can sign. So the second pile is signed over to his father. Sanger's verdict on how that signature was obtained sits in 2 words: induced or forced. The boy dies. The paperwork survives. And the land itself, the Grange, the prize, the house with the candles? Sanger checked every doctrine, and here is the finding the Gothic fog has hidden for a century. There isn't one. Heathcliff had no right to Thrushcross Grange. Not as a husband, not as a father, not as a creditor. He held it by bare possession, because the rightful owner was a 17-year-old widow standing in his kitchen, with no money, no family left, and no lawyer in riding distance who would take on the man who held every deed in the valley. Wrongful possession. never prosecuted. The most famous brooding romantic hero in English literature dies as what the paperwork says he was, a man squatting on a stolen estate. And Emily Bronte knew. We know she knew, because of how she ends it. The wedding that closes the book, Hareton and young Cathy, set for the 1st of January 1803, quietly returns both estates to their lawful bloodlines. The ending readers call fate is the law, reasserting itself the moment the squatter stops breathing. Be careful with this, though, and let me hedge it out loud. None of this makes the book a legal pamphlet, and it does not make the love false. The love is real on the page. It's why the cover sheet worked for 179 years. What the audit proves is narrower and stranger. She chose to build her romance on real law, and she got the law right. So the famous love story audits clean. A port, a fortune, a takeover, a restoration. But there is one question the law cannot answer, and it's the one a first-time reader feels on every page. Why does everyone in this book die? Hindley's young wife Frances, coughing through her first winter as a mother, the doctor says the winter will finish her, and it does. Edgar, fading for months in his library. Heathcliff's boy, dead at 17. That answer is not in the novel at all. It is in a register in the village where the author lived. The back half of this file is about who pays. Haworth, Yorkshire, a steep stone village on the edge of the moors. At the top of the hill, the church, the parsonage where the Brontes lived. And between them, pressed against the parsonage garden on two sides, the churchyard. Uphill from the village. Uphill from the water. In 1850, a government inspector named Benjamin Herschel Babbage came to Haworth and counted what the village had been living with. 69 privies for 2,500 people, 24 houses sharing one, no sewers, waste running open down the main street, 11 water pumps for the whole village, and the wells fed from the hillside where 40,000 bodies, by the village's own reckoning, had been buried in a churchyard with no drains. His report records what came out of the pumps in summer.
So green and putrid that cattle refused to touch it.
The people drank it. They queued for it from 2 in the morning. And then Babbage did the arithmetic that makes Haworth a forensic exhibit. The average age at death in the village, 25.8 years. He had to reach for a comparison his readers would believe, and he found it in the capital. Whitechapel, the worst slums of London, matched on a Yorkshire hillside in the open air. More than 4 of every 10 children born in Haworth were dead before their 6th birthday. That is the death rate Emily Bronte grew up inside. That is why nobody in her novel gets old. Tuberculosis, the era's biggest killer, a quarter of all deaths at its peak, moved through houses like weather, and no one yet knew it was contagious. There was no treatment but better air. In the book, the dying are forever being moved to kinderhouses for their health. It never works. She had watched it never work. Here is what the watching cost. The inspector came because of a petition, 222 signatures demanding clean water, organized by the village parson. The parson's name was Patrick Bronte, Emily's father. And he signed it in the year he buried the last of a sequence no parent should be able to count. His son Branwell, that September. Emily, that December. Anne, the following May. 3 grown children in 8 months, the same disease. To be precise here, because precision is the whole point, the parsonage had its own well. The family did not drink from the village pumps. The contaminated water was the village's burden, and tuberculosis was the family's. The point is not the glass in their hands. The point is the register, the one their father kept. In the church, beside the graves, recording a village and a household dying on the same schedule as the novel. Emily Bronte published Wuthering Heights in December 1847. Within a year, she was dying of tuberculosis, and she met it exactly like one of her own characters. She refused every doctor. No poisoning doctor, she said. Kept rising at 7, kept feeding the dogs, while she thinned and the cough deepened. As the family told it, she had caught the chill at her brother's funeral. On the morning of December 19th, 1848, she finally gave in. Her sister recorded the sentence.
If you will send for a doctor, I will see him now.
By 2 o'clock that afternoon, she was dead. on the dining room sofa, 30 years old. 1 year, almost to the day, after the book was published. The village carpenter, William Wood, logged the order in his account book the way he logged any other joinery. A coffin, 5 feet 7 inches long, 16 inches wide. He said he had never made a narrower one for an adult. Her huge mastiff, Keeper, walked at the head of the funeral procession, into the church, and afterward lay outside her empty bedroom door. She was buried in the family vault beneath the church, a few steps from the churchyard above the water. Haworth got its clean supply in 1856, 6 years after the report. By then, Patrick Bronte had outlived all 6 of his children. He answered the condolence letters himself and kept the registers alone in the parsonage for 13 more years. So leave the poster on the board. The greatest love story of all time. It can stay. It earned its place honestly. People have loved this book for 179 years, and the love on the page is real. Just look at what surrounds it now. A port that priced children, named in the book's 4th chapter by date. A fortune built in the war years on that coastline, carried home with no paperwork because none was expected. 2 estates taken by signatures, a mortgage, an elopement, a forced wedding, a dying boy's will. And one of them held, at the end, by no right at all. And a parish register, kept by the author's own father, where the village and the household die on the novel's schedule. The famous version is not exactly false. It is the part of the file you were allowed to keep. Now look at the story again.